Geographically speaking, South Korea doesn't seem like a country poised for wealth. It's only slightly larger than the state of Indiana, and unlike Indiana, it isn't agriculturally productive. The terrain is rugged and steep, with only 20% of its land suitable for farming. Furthermore, South Korea lacks significant mineral wealth. It has some coal reserves, but it ranks 49th globally in proven reserves. The country also faces challenges with natural gas reserves, ranking 81st in the world, and it has no oil reserves. When you zoom out from the Rocky Peninsula and consider the neighboring region, it's filled with past and present economic powerhouses. South Korea, historically squeezed by surrounding empires and limited in natural resources, should theoretically be a poor nation. However, it defies these geographical and resource limitations. South Korea boasts the world's 10th largest economy by nominal GDP, and a substantial part of this remarkable economic growth can be attributed to a single company. Before the Republic of Korea existed and before the Korean War, there was a modest grocery trading shop in Daegu, South Korea known as Samsung, dealing in fish and noodles. In 1938, the shop's owner, Byung-chul, could not have foreseen that his business would become the linchpin of one of the most remarkable economic transformations of the 20th century, often referred to as the Miracle on Han River. This economic transformation was the result of long-term planning combined with astute opportunism and was also influenced by the fact that in 1950, South Korea was on the brink of disappearing due to the Korean War. By August of that year, South Korean forces had little territory left to defend as the Communist North had taken control of nearly the entire peninsula. However, the war and South Korea's subsequent turnaround created new opportunities. Lee pivoted in the midst of the Korean War's destruction. In 1953, he established Cheiljedang, a sugar refinery, followed by Cheilmojik, a wool mill in the following year, both under the Samsung Group. This was a logical progression as South Koreans urgently needed everyday products and food. South Korea's first president, Syngman Rhee, had begun directing international aid to allied industrialists to reduce the country's reliance on imports. Rhee's government supported the construction of facilities and the importation of raw sugar for Lee's new projects. With few competitors in a war-torn nation and timely expansions, the Samsung Group quickly became the country's fourth largest borrower, thanks to its strong political connections and control over crucial industries. In the years that followed, Samsung expanded its influence by acquiring Ankuk Fire and Marine Insurance and Chohung Bank, while also becoming a major shareholder in 4 other banks. In less than a decade after obtaining its first sugar refinery, Samsung had grown into the most powerful conglomerate on the Korean peninsula. Lee Byung-chul, the founder, amassed a net worth estimated to represent a staggering 19% of all South Korean wealth. Samsung had become a massive success. However, while South Korea has made progress by distributing Western recovery funds and ending feudal land practices, the majority of South Koreans were still economically disadvantaged, and the country remained predominantly agricultural and underdeveloped. These challenges became prominent when the military overthrew President Syngman Rhee's government in 1961. South Korea's economic transformation truly began under a new leader, Park Chung-hee. His presidency was characterized by a relentless focus on expanding industrial exports and harnessing South Korea's human capital. As a result, GDP per capita growth skyrocketed, dipping below 9% annually only 3 times from 1963 to 1978. The driving force behind this growth was the conglomerates. Despite Park's initial plan to dismantle monopolies that had arisen through dubious means during the post-war period, he changed course. Instead of breaking up the conglomerates, he assigned them the crucial task of exporting Korean-made goods to the world. With the government providing cheap steel, numerous subsidies, lenient loans, and tax incentives to major manufacturers, companies like Samsung, LG, Hyundai, and SK Group expanded vertically and horizontally. These family-controlled corporate groups, aided by the government, became known as chaebols, a term that gained widespread use in Korean society during the 1960s and 1970s as these institutions grew. During the 1970s and 1980s, chaebols dominated the South Korean economy, propelling their products into the global market. Samsung ventured into TVs, semiconductors, and mobile phones for export, Hyundai sold cars internationally, and LG established a factory in Huntsville, Alabama. While South Korean citizens debated the role of chaebols in politics and society, there was no denying their overwhelmingly positive impact on everyday standards of living. Life expectancy doubled from 1950 to 1990, and infant mortality plummeted to less than a tenth of what it was at the end of the Korean War. The chaebols showed no sign of slowing down. Even into the 21st century, South Korea's GDP continued to grow, and after the passing of Lee Byung-chul in 1987, Samsung expanded globally and maintained its dominance in the domestic market under the leadership of his son, Lee Kun-hee. Today, just 7 decades after the company's strategic shift, Samsung is synonymous with South Korea and vice versa. For the average South Korean, the relationship with Samsung runs as deep as that with the government itself. This is exemplified by a remarkable statistic. Year after year, approximately 20% of the entire nation's GDP is composed of Samsung Group revenue. The remarkable degree of economic concentration in South Korea, specifically with Samsung, is unparalleled. Samsung accounts for roughly 20% of South Korea's entire GDP. This level of concentration far exceeds the most extreme examples from other countries around the world. For instance, Japan's largest economy, Toyota, represents about 5% of its GDP, and Walmart in the United States accounts for just 2.5%. The significance of Samsung in South Korean life goes beyond economics. Young people and their parents often aspire to become the Samsung man, seen as the pinnacle of success in the country. Achieving this status requires navigating a path through academic and social challenges to qualify for a job at the nation's largest company. Pursuing a position at Samsung is a common theme in South Korean society and culture, and it is often depicted in films and television. South Korea's educational system prepares its youth for a chance to take the Samsung Aptitude Test, which can be likened to an entrance exam. Hundreds of thousands of hopeful candidates take the test with the aim of scoring high enough to attract recruiters' attention. However, the majority of test takers do not advance, leading many to consider alternative career paths such as working for smaller chaebols like Hyundai or LG. Those who do not succeed at that level may ultimately find employment with small and medium-sized employers, a fact that is sometimes hidden from extended family and friends due to the perception of failure. Samsung's vast reach in South Korean life is evident across various sectors, including smartphones, life insurance, shipbuilding, and even theme parks. The conglomerate's diverse structure reflects its history of seizing opportunities wherever they arise, playing a crucial role in the Lee family's continued dominance. Currently, there are 59 major Samsung affiliate companies, though the definition of major can be subjective. Control within the conglomerate is often determined by majority ownership. This allows the Lee family to control multiple affiliates indirectly through the complex web of share ownership. Even when a straightforward majority is technically required for control, the Lee family often only needs around 30% or 40% direct or indirect control if the remaining ownership is held by reliable outside investors. These intricate structures can become precarious upon the death of a family member. South Korea has one of the world's highest inheritance taxes at 50%. This means that heirs are required to pay half the value of the assets to the government when inherited. To cover this substantial tax bill, heirs might need to sell a significant portion of their inherited shares, potentially leading to a loss of voting power. This situation became increasingly relevant when Lee Kun-hee, the chairman of Samsung, suffered a heart attack and entered a coma. With the 50% inheritance tax looming, the family had to craft a creative plan to ensure Samsung remained under family control after his passing. The proposed merger of CNT and Cheil was viewed as an objectively bad deal for CNT shareholders. In this merger, one CNT share would convert to 0.35 Cheil shares, which effectively inflated the value of Cheil and consequently the wealth of the Lee family at the expense of CNT shareholders. To succeed in pushing the merger through, the Lee family needed supermajority approval from 2/3 of shareholders, meaning they had to convince CNT shareholders to vote against their own interests. A significant challenge to this was the South Korean National Pension Service, which was the single largest outside shareholder with an 11.6% ownership stake. The pension service was run by the Ministry of Health and Welfare, which was part of the South Korean government, led by President Park Kun-hee at the time. The Lee family aimed to influence President Park to, in turn, persuade the pension service to vote in favor of the merger. They found a backdoor connection through Choi Soon-sil, a confidant of President Park and the daughter of an influential cult leader. Choi wielded considerable influence over the president's decision-making, despite holding no official position. She managed 2 nonprofits, the Mir and K Sports Foundations, which ostensibly focused on cultural exchanges and sports projects, but were used as part of a complex money laundering scheme. Samsung, under the direction of Lee Jae-yong, donated $36 million to Choi's foundations. Shortly thereafter, the state pension fund voted in favor of the CNT and Cheil merger, and it was approved. This merger allowed the Lee family to secure control of the Samsung empire for the next generation. However, the details of these dealings later became public, leading to a massive scandal. President Park was impeached and jailed. Lee Jae-yong was indicted and jailed as well. Subsequently, both were pardoned and freed, and Lee Jae-yong eventually becoming the chairman of Samsung Group following his father's death. This cycle of legal troubles followed by pardons has occurred before in the Samsung dynasty. Lee Kun-hee, Lee Jae-yong's father, was sentenced to jail in 2008 for bribery but was pardoned a year later by the president to continue his role in international sports governance. The pardon was later revealed to have involved bribery itself. In 2022, a similar justification was used for Lee Jae-yong's pardon, as Samsung and various business groups lobbied for his release. He was on parole but continued to act as the de facto leader of Samsung, even meeting with President Biden. The argument for his pardon was that, as the likely heir to the Samsung chairmanship, and given the significant economic influence of Samsung in South Korea, his leadership was necessary to guide the company as it recovered from the COVID-19 pandemic. While such pardons may be perceived as unfair, they could be seen as pragmatic in the context of Samsung's substantial role in the South Korean economy. This cycle appears unbreakable. South Korea, including its politicians, heavily relies on Samsung. However, Samsung can potentially survive without South Korea by restructuring and shifting its focus elsewhere. This situation where a huge company exists in a small country poses challenges. It's doubtful that corporations should govern nations. Younger generations are increasingly opposing Samsung due to a lack of sympathy for its historical role in the country's development, and public dissent is growing. The question is, which part will crumble first? The complex ownership structure maintaining Lee family control, or the fragile balance between Samsung and South Korea, challenged by its own people?